Hey gang, welcome to Wilson Combat Channel and welcome to the Circle WC Ranch, which is probably the ultimate man cave in the United States of America. And in a place like this, I should be talking to you about adventure and gunfire and savage charging lions. But I'm going to take the challenge of risking to bore you. I'm going to talk to you about combat semantics. Words mean things. You've all heard that, and it's a cliche. But if you think about it, most cliches, most often repeated phrases became such for a reason. They are true. Words mean things on the shooting range, they mean things on the street, and they most certainly can make or break you in court. So let's look at some examples. I've been teaching firearms for 50 years now. One thing I have all my staff instructors do is make the point they reserve the term load for actually putting live ammunition into a firearm. We use the term fill for filling magazines and speed loaders. Why not use the common load your magazines? Because in the range environment, remember, we have mandatory hearing protection. We have literally made everybody deaf. And you do this long enough, someday you're going to yell, load the magazines, and someone who's in obedience mode to their instructor is going to load their gun when they're in the wrong place, and the dominoes will start to fall as far as safety. So that's why we use the terminology, load your firearm, fill your magazines. Sounds kind of chicken shit, but let me tell you, if it prevents one mistake, it's going to be worth the time you took, and it's going to be worth the effort. Let's look on the street. Commands have to be given when you take someone at gunpoint or you're in a high-stress situation. Let's say we have an officer who's pursuing an armed robbery suspect who's armed with a sawed-off shotgun. He yells at the suspect, stop. Suspect does stop, turns toward him with that shotgun, and the cop shoots him down. And the inevitable lawsuit that will follow, estate of deceased armed robber versus Officer Joe Smith in the Smallville Police Department. Plaintiff's counsel is going to say, well, he shot him for obeying his command. He told him to stop. Well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that means stop what you're doing. He did stop, and the officer shot him. Yeah, he stopped what he was doing, and he turned and pointed a demonstrably lethal weapon at you, and that's why he got shot. But don't leave that argument hanging in the wind for someone to use. Very commonly, and still to some degree today, cops use the command freeze. Why do cops largely get away from that? The word freeze conveys everything we're trying to get across to the person we're attempting to detain or arrest. It means stop all movement right there where you are. The problem with it was phonetic. Freeze is a mushy word. It begins with that soft consonant F. You yell freeze, a lot of the witnesses will just hear yays, and they're not sure what you're talking about. I recall one case where one witness said the officer who yelled freeze, he called him a sleaze. New York City Police Department picked up on that back in the late 1960s, and they did a study that involved linguistics professors, veteran street cops, and I believe John Jay College. And what they came up with was the command, don't move! It's 2 syllables instead of 1. It does convey what you need to convey, but most important, it began with that hard consonant D. And that hard D penetrated the consciousness. They found out sleeping people who were awakened by hearing someone yell, don't move, could repeat the words that woke them. And that's why the don't move command has become preferred, not only for the armed citizen, but for police, who normally will preface it with another hard consonant word, police, don't move, which naturally a private citizen should not do because they don't want to be impersonating a police officer. Other words that will get you in court, the other side will try to trick you into saying that you regret what you've done or that you feel remorse for what you've done. Now, they know that your attorney will have told you, look, don't turn into Rambo on that witness stand, okay? Let the jury know you care, that you were the one who were forced to end a human life and you don't feel good about it. The other side knows that and they'll play on it. And you might get some false sympathy question like, well, you didn't get up that morning wanting to shoot a 20-year-old man, did you? And most of us would say, no, of course not. And you regret the shooting, don't you? And most people would say yes. And you feel remorse about it, don't you? They'd say yes. And you have made the fatal mistake. They'll unveil what they're doing in their final argument, a term that probably warrants some definition. In criminal or civil cases, the accusing side actually gets 2 closing arguments. The defense gets but 1. The reason for that is the accusing side bears the burden of proof, and it's the legal system's way of balancing the scales on that relative burden. The accusing side will give a closing argument, the defense will give their close, and then the so-called rebuttal by the accusing side will be the final close. In that final close, when it's too late for you to jump up and say, damn it, that's not what I meant, they'll say something like, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, how many of you caught that subtle moment when the defendant confessed his guilt, when he admitted that he felt regret, when he admitted to his remorse? And then they'll flash up on their PowerPoint screen or their flip chart to the definition they've chosen from the many definitions of complicated words in the English language to the one they want, not the one you meant. Regret, bad feelings, connotative of guilt. Remorse, bad feelings, connotative of guilt. They admitted their guilt. To give you a good example of that, I do some appellate work. I've been an expert witness for the court since 1979. Many of those who are appealing their conviction obviously are doing so because they believe they were wrongfully convicted, or at least they're alleging so. Many of them are also trying for parole. And if you've ever worked with a parole board, one thing they demand from the would-be parolee is remorse. Remorse means you apologize for your crime, you're accepting responsibility for a crime, you're accepting your guilt in that crime, and you're sorry about it. The element of remorse is really a necessary ingredient to gain parole. Do you see why the word remorse is connected to the word guilt? Never let them trick you into that. Now, I try not to put words in people's mouths, but if I was on that witness stand and I was the accused, and they asked me, did I regret having shot my attacker? Did I feel remorse about it? I would hope to have the presence of mind to say, sir, those words don't cover it. I can't tell you how badly I feel that I was forced to end that young man's life. I've lost people I love, and I know what his parents must be going through, and my heart goes out to them. Do not ask me to regret my own survival. You cannot ask me to feel remorse that I'm alive because I took the one last resort I had to keep that young man from killing me. Know where the attack on you is going to come, have the counter in place. And that attack will often come in the form of words. We have another Wilson Combat video where we discussed in depth the tragic case of the shooting death of Botham Jean in Dallas, Texas, at the hands of off-duty police officer Amber Geiger. Geiger lived in a cookie-cutter apartment building where all the floors and doors looked the same, and came back after a double shift distracted and came off at the wrong floor. Kind of on autopilot going home, counted down the number of doors to what should be her apartment. When she put her key card in the door was already ajar. And as the door swings open, she sees the familiar layout of her apartment and a large man coming toward her going, hey, hey, hey! And she reflexively drew her weapon and fired. One of the 2 shots she fired killed a young man in his own apartment. She was at the wrong apartment. It was a classic example of what our colleague Andrew Branca, the attorney who wrote the excellent book, Law of Self-Defense, popularized the term awful but lawful. At law, it's what's called an excusable homicide as opposed to a justifiable one. That is, a justifiable homicide, the finding of the triers of the facts is that you were right to kill him under the circumstances. The excusable homicide is, okay, in the 20/20 hindsight of the Monday morning quarterback, you shouldn't have killed him, but any reasonable person would very likely have made the same mistake within the totality of the circumstances, and therefore you, the shooter, must be excused from culpability. While that case fit the profile of the excusable homicide, Ms. Geiger, when she was on the stand, was asked, "Did you shoot to kill?" And she replied in the affirmative. She was convicted. Her appeal was denied. And if you read that, which you can find online, the appellate court's explanation of why they affirmed the conviction, was that she had said she had shot to kill. Here's why. Intent is critical. State of mind is critical. What makes a killing a murder is the element of malice. And in Texas and in so many other states, the intentional killing of another human being is the definition of murder. The reason that's important is the shoot to kill phrase has, longer than any of us been alive, been part of American idiom. People think any shot to vital areas of the body is a shot to kill. And that's why any responsible concealed carry course, and virtually every police department in the country, will tell their officers you're not, or their students, you're not shooting to kill. Your purpose in this is not to end his life. You're shooting to stop. The defensive shot is fired to stop a violent criminal from killing you or killing another innocent person. And there are fools out there who say, oh, that's namby-pamby, politically correct BS. We real men are aiming here, we're aiming here, of course, we shoot to kill. And that's the words of somebody who's never been in court except to pay a traffic ticket. Words mean things. Words speak to intent. Intent defines the act. It defines the act. If she had said shoot to stop, she might have been acquitted. She very likely would have won her appeal. That one syllable, that yes to did you shoot to kill, sent that young woman to prison. And a tragedy that was bad enough it had destroyed one life had now unnecessarily destroyed two. I'll end with what I began. Words mean things. Know how those words will be used against you, and make it a practice to keep that from happening. I'd like to thank you for tuning in to the Wilson Combat Channel. We have a lot of people who do some elements of this for a living. The gun, self-defense, sometimes hunting and sport shooting. There's a lot to be learned here, and I watch the Wilson Combat Channel with the other presenters. I hope you do too. Finally, I'd like you to comment in the space provided. We all learn from each other, and it's not just the experts talking to the expert, the gun guys chatting with the gun guys. It's teachers talking with students, and sometimes the student becomes the teacher. Often your comments here on the Wilson Combat have inspired the next segment that we have the professionals do for you. We'll look forward to seeing you again down the road on the Wilson Combat Channel. Stay safe.